what Putin's elites fear, and how Donald Trump might influence it, including potential concessions from the newly elected U.S. president. Let's talk about all of this and more right now. This is live on YouTube, Channel 24. It's traditionally Saturday, which means we have Olga Kurnosova, Russian opposition activist, political analyst, and I'll be talking to her, Iryna Uzlova. The Telegraph reports that Donald Trump may not rule out an initiative to keep us out of NATO for another 20 years, but to send not us, but troops to us, British and European troops. Here I remembered my colleague, journalist, publicist, and TV host Vitaly Portnikov, how in 2014, Naryshkin said that the big war would start exactly when at least one NATO military put its boot on Ukrainian soil. Portnikov argues, and I agree, that the mindset of Russia's leadership, including Naryshkin and Putin, has likely not changed. Is it possible that Putin, even now, might escalate the war further, especially when NATO is already portrayed as fighting against them? How would they respond to one of Trump's potential proposals? The North Koreans are fighting. All the migrants who have been captured and dragged somewhere are fighting. Who doesn't fight and do what they do? The front lines are not small. So sprawl where? To the Baltic states or Poland, where who are they intimidating all the time? But I don't even have words here. Yes, although it is clear that the only thing they have left today is intimidation, blackmail, and threats, which they do all the time. But honestly, it's weird that they can still get, it's understandable that it's getting bigger. But nevertheless, Putin, and in general, I heard from his speech that he seems to be not against talking. Yes, he says we are ready with Donald Trump, and he's not just ready, he's done it. And not only that, we heard about his possible, but perhaps excessive hopes for renewed relations with Trump and with the states, or is it not necessary for a dictator after all? Trump was elected president, as Putin said, himself. Like it, don't like it, bear with it, my beauty. Here you go, what is called take back your own statement. So yes, you didn't want Trump, you got him, and now you start twirling your asses. Peskov says that we will not congratulate him, that it is an unfriendly country to congratulate him. A day has not passed, Putin is already congratulating him, because they really do not know what to do and what else to say so that Trump will not want to hit Novogorovo tomorrow. Because the Kremlin, in fact the cathedrals, let them stand, but Novogorovo could be hit. So, of course, Putin got a little scared, so he had to congratulate and babble something and say that he was ready for anything, even to talk on the phone. But he still did not congratulate him on the first day, but on the second, on the third hour of his speech, which was not quite close to reality. Actually, it's the opposite. Compared to 2016, the Kremlin didn't seem to celebrate Trump's return. Maybe they didn't want to, or perhaps they've realized they can't predict what to expect from him. The uncertainty is frightening. They might pop the champagne, but the cork could hit someone in the face, leaving them horrified. It's all unclear. The Kremlin doesn't understand when Trump says that he is now going to make Putin do as he sees fit. Putin doesn't understand very well exactly what he's going to tell him. Suddenly, he will actually say that Putin, this may not be the case if he is not prepared to talk seriously enough. Not just. Путина-то может и не быть, если он не готов разговаривать достаточно серьезно. America has the capabilities to know every second where this same Putin is, but also has the means of delivery and weaponry that they don't use. Why nuclear weapons? You don't need to use them. Using other weapons, we can eliminate Putin, just as the Israelis are eliminating Hamas leaders one by one. How is Putin different from them? Yes, very little. Only the fact that he is the president of a large country, but which behaves quite like a terrorist country, and more than that. Dmitry Peskov, who initially said there was no plan to congratulate Trump, eventually did, and now states that Russia's openness to dialogue on Ukraine doesn't signal a change in war goals, and it's too early to discuss improving relations with the U.S. Donald Trump has already spoken with Ukrainian President Zelensky and discussed the war with Ursula von der Leyen and leaders from over 70 countries, but Russia was not included. Why is he not calling Putin, or is he waiting for them to beg for a conversation? When can this call take place, and how much of it will initially be about Ukraine? Or are there other topics that might be more of a priority? Or will Trump immediately issue ultimatums to Putin? Well, Trump is such a hot guy, so he may give ultimatums right away. Now he will first agree with APEC on lowering oil prices, and then he will say, well, Van, are you going to show off further? And now we're going to give you a price of $50 per barrel. So jump around and say whatever you want and do whatever you want. What will you use to produce your weapons?
И дальше можешь что угодно говорить и что угодно делать. На какие шиши ты, собственно, будешь свое оружие производить, и что ты будешь там этим своим северным корейцам платить, из каких денег.
And what are you going to pay those North Koreans over there? With what money?
Чтобы понимать уже, где то, чем он Путина по голове трещин дарахнет.
Speaking of which, yes, this drill baby principle right here. Increase your own fossil resources, sell oil resources in particular, is a principle Trump will take up with audits, more than probably, as you point out, right? Not only will such deals be made, and how likely is it that perhaps, and not even $50, but perhaps even $40 a barrel, Trump can lower Putin's oil, and thus lower Putin himself?
Опустить самого Путина. И, кстати говоря, в плане Майка Помпео, озвученном летом, который вполне возможно станет одним из или министром...
Pompeo's plan voiced becoming one of the secretaries. It sounded, this is the oil pressure that could come from Trump. Is that going to stay on the table now, do you suppose? I think that's what will be left on the table. Everyone remembers that at one time it was this catastrophic drop in oil prices that brought down the Soviet Union. No less. No less. And even I think Putin, for all his dourness, remembers it well too. When prices drop significantly, it will be the right time to negotiate with Putin and see if his demands remain or if he'll realize the situation is over. Over 1,000 people are watching, so please like and comment to help our discussion reach more on YouTube.
YouTube 24-го. Напомню, друзья, пожалуйста, поставьте свой лайк. Также напомню вам об этой опции, потому что именно она, еще именно ваш комментарий, конечно же, подписка на YouTube 24-го, это можете сделать позже, позволяет нашей беседе...
So I'm grateful for every one of your likes. You can also ask Olga questions, and I will rebroadcast them. And at the same time, Olga, what do you think there could be not so much ultimatums, but perhaps also such pressures on the Ukrainian side, our side, for the sake of possible potential concessions? Trump is a businessman. A businessman. That is, this could be a trade between both sides. How long will it take? As time is limited, or is Trump a quick decision maker? I think Trump is a man of quick decisions. The main thing is that he has them. So if we understand how he can pressure Putin, we certainly understand how he can pressure Ukraine.
Чем он может давить и на Украину, да, это поставки вооружений. Но так как мы прекрасно помним, что все-таки первым начал...
Yes, it is arms supplies. But since we remember very well that it was Trump who first started supplying arms after all,
помню концепцию Трампа по поставкам вооружений, которую, собственно, республиканцы выдвигали.
lethal, I remind you, javelins, and we remember Trump's concept of arms transfers, which actually the Republicans have been putting forward. It's Lend-Lease transfers, not other means. And Lend-Lease is actually a good way of supplying arms. Yes, technically it is a supply of arms on credit, but now the main task is to win the war. And if enough of them are supplied under Lend-Lease, it is quite a normal way to get what you want. So I think Trump is going to be saying, first of all, we need to move to a different way of supplying arms. And probably, well, it seems to me, he can. I am wrong. Accordingly, we'll raise questions. If the armaments that Ukraine is talking about are obtained, what results can be expected and in what time frame? I think that's the kind of conversation that will happen. Olga, I'm sure Putin, with his obsession, keeps thinking about Istanbul. Peskov also mentioned that Russia's openness to dialogue doesn't mean abandoning the goals of the operation.
Но мы же понимаем с вами, что это ничего общего не имеет с целями нашими, с освобождением от российских оккупантов. И вообще, какой Стамбул? Уже столько воды с того времени утекло. А действительно ли Истамбул и еще что-то вот такое?
He mentioned the Istanbul agreements again, but we know they have nothing to do with our goals. So much time has passed since then. Can Putin really offer anything from Istanbul now? We remember well, and if Trump doesn't, his advisors will remind him that Russia withdrew from those agreements. Medinsky claimed they were largely harmonized, but everyone immediately criticized him, saying he had no authority to make such decisions. So we remember all of this, and no matter how much Putin shakes these agreements today, we remember that Russia did not want to conclude them. In fact, the troop withdrawal that they are trying to pass off as some kind of goodwill was achieved thanks to the actions of the armed forces of Ukraine. Therefore, we have a good memory, and no Putin or Peskov will not change this memory for us. That's why the Stockholm Accords were interesting when they were discussed, in the spring of the 22nd year. Now we are in the fall of the 24th. It's been, a year and a half. A lot of water has passed since then. And I'm not just talking about the huge amount of destruction, deaths, everything that has happened during this time. All the deadly iron that lies in the Ukrainian soil. Where to put this? Therefore, of course, today it is not even funny to talk about the Stockholm agreements, because it is absolutely irrelevant. What kind of agreements should there be? Well, we talked about what kind of ultimatum Trump might give. Let's wait for him to give that ultimatum. If Putin is brought a little bit to his senses by the threat of force, then maybe we can talk to him. Then, of course, it is inaccurate. Well, what if he will not even follow the ultimatum and says, that's it, I need to conquer Ukraine and restore the Soviet Union? He is probably also, of course, genocide of us, of course, and not only restoration of some empires. Then what? Can tomahawks fly at the Kremlin, after all? Or not? After all, Trump said in one of his publications that if you don't get away from Ukraine, missiles will fly at the Kremlin. And not only that. When he said this to Putin, the circumstances weren't specified. But we'd suggest to Donald not to hit the Kremlin. There are beautiful palaces in Valdai and near Moscow. Perhaps a tomahawk could target one of those. Just follow the movements, and you'll learn everything. Yeah, it'll show. Europe, learning to be more independent, sees Viktor Orban leading due to his closeness to Trump. The European Political Unity Summit discussed Trump and future prospects. Pavel Klimkin suggested Budapest could become a meeting place for leaders from the West, Global South, and Asia.
Ну и вот саммит Европейской политического единства проходил у него, и все поехали быстренько, чтобы наверняка поговорить также и о Трампе, и о возможных будущих перспективах.
Olaf Scholz, facing a tough time politically, reiterated the need to continue supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression. And there can be nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. This is one principle with which almost everyone agrees. And what does almost everyone mean? There are people like Orban who indeed what role they can play in the negotiation track regarding the Russian-Ukrainian war and in general around the security of Europe, which now has to rely not only on the United States. It's understandable, no matter what decisions Trump makes. Europe has been discussing the creation of its own armed forces for a long time, and has long argued that without it, there will be no sense of security in Europe. Well, we need to do it. We need to do it. We need to move from talk to action. The next issue, which of course is also quite acute in Europe, is absolute consensus in decision-making. Yes, as long as there is the principle of consensus, accordingly, countries such as Hungary or Robert Fico can exploit this very consensus in order to put sticks in the wheels, preventing the implementation of decisions taken by the majority. Since there is such a story, yes, they can try to sell this separate dissenting opinion as long as they are allowed to have it, as long as everyone has to make 300 jumps in order to overcome. As we know, Orban's veto, for example, is quite easily overcome for money. Another bad loan from the European Union, everything. The veto is overcome. Yes, he immediately understands it too, by the way. That is, we understand that both from Trump and from Europe, the general mechanism of peace through force, which Zelensky also recalled, will now be activated. Will it work? You know, when fighting dictatorships, there is simply no other way, whether it's fighting from within the country. The only way, rid the country of the dictatorship and to rid the world of the danger, is in fact some kind of forceful interaction with this very dictatorship. Perhaps it's liquidation by force. So here it turns out that we can't go anywhere without it. The only way to talk to Putin is the language of force. It's the only language he understands. If he doesn't understand, we should resort to stronger measures, including using force to eliminate the dictatorship. Perhaps with the elimination of the dictator himself. Almost 1,500 people are with us on this Saturday, November 9th. When watching the recording, you'll know the date. With me is Olha Kurnosova, Russian opposition activist and political analyst. I'm Iryna Uzlova. Our viewers, including Elena Nefyodova, raise the idea that, like Soleimani, Trump could take action to remove him. Why not eliminate this core figure, the one leading this war that benefits him the most, while the elites are either becoming disillusioned or giving up? This one is not, and a couple of other people around. Well, this is one of the ways, and this is one of the ways that is quite effective. Yes, if you look at how dictatorships fell in the 20th century, this is one of the ways, a military coup, or another effective way, a palace coup.
Соответственно, тогда ведь не было этих способов доставки томагавков. А теперь-то они есть, и тогда не было способов.
Accordingly, well, there weren't these ways of delivering tomahawks then, and there are now. There were no ways to deliver tomahawks then, but now there are, and there were no ways to pinpoint the location of an object then, but now there are. So if in the 20th century you needed von Stenberg to get to an object accurately, and it didn't work out the way it should, now there are much simpler ways. So as soon as a political decision is made, the box will be opened immediately. I'd love to see Putin's regime collapse. As for the mood of the elites, Bloomberg reports that Russian business has lost hope for sanctions relief under Trump. While Russian propaganda celebrates Trump's election victory, Russian elites are not as optimistic and are not eager to celebrate.
В то время как российская пропаганда празднует победу на выборах США Дональда, а прокремлевские эксперты обсуждают отмену санкций и капитуляцию Украины, российские бизнес-элиты не столь оптимистичны и не спешат, опять же таки, открывать шампанское и не только.
Oligarchs and top managers of state corporations don't expect Trump to ease sanctions, even if the Ukraine conflict is frozen. I recently spoke with Igor Lipsitz, an economist, who noted that before Putin's wars, there were economic ties between Russia and the U.S., like engine manufacturing. However, as Putin escalated the wars, these connections faded. So what reason would Trump have to ease or remove sanctions on Russia?
И многого чего другого, то со временем, с тем, как Путин масштабировал и продлевал войны, это все ушло на нет, стало тленом. Поэтому какой экономический, да и политический...
It won't do him any good. It's not going to get him anything. And again, don't get your hopes up. If he's going to loosen them, it's only after he drops oil prices, not just because he doesn't think the sanctions regime is very workable. He thinks it is much more profitable to drop oil prices and will seek to do so if it works better. Well, you can lift the sanctions. The main thing is to economically strike the Kremlin as quickly as possible. Yes, he'll choose the most effective ways. So don't get too excited. I don't understand sometimes why they get excited and think the sanctions issue was almost immediately discussed by the elites. Not only some still thought it could change, but still, if you think back 4 years of Trump's first presidency, we're discussing this as if it's new, but it already happened with a new wave of sanctions. Oligarchs were also targeted then. Personal sanctions, unlike sectoral ones, are more effective, even if sectoral sanctions may be less impactful, and dropping oil and gas prices could be more profitable. They're doing quite well and personalized, so no one's going to cancel this one. Deripaska predicts that Russia is now facing a bleak future, and he recalls the oil price discussing today and their impact on the Russian budget, which is shaped for war. And indeed, what shade of this gloomy future do you see now that Trump is coming? And not only that, but it seems to me that it will accelerate the processes. Yes, by all accounts, Russia is waiting for the transit of power. And this transit of power is about to begin, as can be seen from the way the elections of the State Duma are being prepared. When many of the current deputies will not be re-elected, they realize this. They also think about what they should do in such a situation, when everyone is on the alert, as they call it. So, of course, if the situation deteriorates even further, there could be a coup d'etat, or another coup d'etat of some kind. Oh, coups are generally our favorite topic, and it's been a long time since we've had any. There was one. Yes, I didn't get to it, of course. Perhaps how long or how quickly such coup processes take place
тема, и как-то давно их что-то не было. Вот один ходил, да, я о Пригожине, конечно, не дошел, а возможно, как долго тогда вот,
When they're
или
ripe.
как быстро происходят такие процессы переворотов, когда они назревают?
When they come, everyone remembers the story of Ceausescu, who was applauded, and then half an hour later, almost his own guards put a bullet in his forehead.
Полчаса почти своя собственная охрана пулю-то в лоб и пустила. Поэтому тут все меняется так быстро, когда уже условия созревают, а в России они вполне себе уже созревают.
That's why everything changes so quickly. When conditions are ripe, in Russia they are ripe. Fine, it's just that it's probably already being discussed in kitchens somewhere. Well, our viewers are writing in. Thank you for being with us. More than 1,600 people have already joined our conversation that more sanctions, more different sanctions, oil below the plinth, this is the best medicine for Russia to get rid of the morass. By the way, we are also watched by viewers who are in opposition to Putin from Moscow, Russia, in different cities and regions also, who as we see are there, although their number is small, of course. To the extent that we see that they agree with us, to the extent that now Russian society could even partially understand what steps Trump is ready to take against Putin. It is possible to inspire such opposition-minded people to be inspired. In fact, we need to wait for some events to happen so that the public can support these events. Because of course, when something happens, it is important that this public support for anti-Putin is also expressed. There's a chance to not only remove Putin, but also eliminate the imperialistic mindset of Russia, a country that, despite its land and resources, seeks conflict with neighbors. This week, the Levada Center released a new survey on Russians' attitudes toward the war Putin started.
Вышла с новым исследованием касательно отношения россиянам к войне, которую развязал их диктатор Путин против нас, и показал этот опрос. Конечно, я опять добавлю, всегда добавляю, чтобы это...
The poll shows that 76% of Russians support the war, but only 40% would approve of their relatives or friends participating. However, in some regions, people are being paid significant amounts, up to $31,000 or over 3 million rubles, to join. Keep in mind, though, that in Putin's dictatorship, the reliability of such polls is questionable due to fear and reluctance to speak openly. And why is it that even such big money does not justify the desire either to go or to send some husband or relative to die for Putin's imperial ambitions, even if for big money? Are Lada and Unitas no longer attractive? Well, apparently all those who were attracted to them are already finished. All those who were ready to die for it are also finished and utilized. Well, those who are left believe that human life is more expensive, and this is true. And accordingly, there is no point in dying for Putin. Moreover, there is no greater worthlessness than dying for Putin. So here we are somehow shrinking, increasing. Ah, no, that leaves North Korea. Yes, if money doesn't work, what will Putin use to lure Russians to war? Or will it be forced mobilization, which in principle does not stop, as Hodge said on Shredin, with a rope noose and a stick? But unfortunately, yes, the only way left is violence, is to catch people in shopping centers, in the subway, somewhere else, and drag them to military recruitment offices to forcibly take them into the army. But as long as this kind of power exists in Russia, the violence will continue because it is the only way they know how to run the country. Olga, what needs to happen for the 76% who support the war to shift and for 76% of Russians to oppose it instead? Why do so many still support Putin's actions with his bloody hands, even if just to avoid their loved ones dying? What's missing in the process? I am not sure that all these 76% are actually in favor of the war. It is quite possible that these 40%, who even now say that their relatives should not go to the war, do not really support it either, but are afraid to say out loud that they have an anti-war position. I think that these 40% are the so-called border guards who sit and say, "My house is on the edge. I don't know anything. Don't touch me, and we won't go anywhere. If you want to fight, then fight, but without us." Yes, in order for them to realize that it will not work without us, that if you do not have your own political positions, if you do not tell Putin to get out, and even if you are afraid to go out on the street for this purpose, but at least in your soul say, "I want to live without Putin," then, perhaps, when a coup d'etat occurs, conditions will appear for the country to change, to make the country normal for the people, not the leaders. This has long seemed a forgotten principle because of leaders as half-witted and half-sick as Putin. Olga, does he fully grasp the risks from Trump? With the North Koreans supposedly helping in the Kurdish region, something doesn't add up. He has China too, but who knows? Maybe fearing Trump, China might help Putin even more. Does Putin think things are fine, or does he realize it's just a phantom positive that could soon be shattered by Trump's actions? Despite some sanity, he likely thinks everything is okay. However, his inner circle knows it's not, and that it could collapse unexpectedly, but they fear telling him that things are bad and need to change.
И прилететь по голове тому же самому Путину, и не только Путину. Тоже самый неожиданный момент. Но они боятся этому самому Путину сказать, что все не окей, а все плохо, парниша, и надо как-то...
Or maybe they think, "Go on in your madness. Finally someone will kill you, and we will be free of you." Olga, thank you so much for the conversation today. See you in a week. Take care. Have a good day. Olga Kurnosova, Russian opposition activist and political analyst. Thank you for joining us. Nearly 2,000 viewers today. Please like, comment, and subscribe to YouTube 24 when watching. Your actions help our discussions reach a wider audience.
Касательно тех тем, которые мы обсудили, и подписывайтесь на YouTube 24-го. Все эти ваши действия позволяют нашим беседам продвигаться его просторами. Берегите себя, верьте в вооруженные силы Украины. Увидимся и победим.